in the early or mid-teens. So I lean slightly toward the mid-teens so that Nephi in his early teens would also be considered marriageable. That makes sense. We're just deducing what the record doesn't tell us because they just took it for granted. Thus Nephi would have been about 70 years old when he died, which accords with the age of the Book of Mormon men who die of old age rather than being killed in battle. So even though Nephi was physically mature, and he says he was large of stature, he fits Laban's armor adequately and is strong enough to hold the frightened Zoram, for instance, he was still a youth and not yet forged into the man that he would become. So if the Lord intervened in the lot casting, why did the lot fall on Laban instead of upon Nephi when the Lord knew that Nephi would succeed? Have you ever asked that question? See, this is another thing I love about Brandt's commentary, is he asks these questions that you go, oh, yeah, I never quite looked at it that way. Now that's a good question. Yeah. What, how? Why? What? I love Gardner's commentary for that reason. Well, it's for the same reason that we are all allowed to fail at various points in our lives. That's quite an interesting answer, isn't it? The combination of moral circumstances, opportunities, agency, and ability to determine the success or the failure of many of the enterprises with which we choose to take. Sure, we're all just human and limited here. With a slightly different mixture, Laban may very well have gotten the plates from Laban, but the point is, he didn't. He failed. Now, this is not saying, however, that because Laban failed, and because then all the brothers failed together and lost all their riches, this is not to say that the mission was going to be a failure from the Lord's point of view. Individuals may fail, but the Lord's plan is not going to fail. Now, that's an important lesson to understand. When we fail in some of our adventures in life, that doesn't mean the plan of God has gone awry. Things are going just as they're supposed to be going. If the Almighty will really does have all knowledge and knows the beginning from the end as we're taught in the Scripture, surely that will, that plan, won't fail, even though some of us individually may fail time and time and time again. The overall plan won't. And we have the freedom to choose to be part of that plan. The Scripture says it plainly. You can choose life or you can choose death. You know, the doctrine of the two ways. In fact, the Hopis are big on that also. I've been studying the Hopis lately. I'm going to do some videos on the Hopis and their prophecies. Very fascinating materials there. This doctrine of the two ways. Very important. The next question is why Laban was chosen rather than Nephi. Have you ever thought of that? I have, actually. And Gardner's explanation is pretty good. Culturally, Laban is the oldest brother in the ancient Hebrew culture. So he was an appropriate candidate. Truly. The selection of Laban would have appeared to confirm Yahweh's hand in the casting of the lots. Laban should have been the first, and he was, you see. But rather than assert that position, he was acknowledged through the process of casting lots. Thus, the episode of the brass plates begins as expected. However, it concludes in an unexpected way with the success of the younger brother. And what this does for us, see, as we read through this story, this signals the pending reversal of the age-dependent family structure, and it also signals Nephi's ascension to leadership, with the additional implication of Yahweh's approval This incident thus justifies Nephi's ascendancy, and this is a bitterly contested process that continues for the duration of the family's journey, even once they get into the New World. Laman's attempt and failure both recognized his birthright, and it marked the birthright's passage onto the worthier son. See how that structure teaches us this. That's so interesting. Well, and then they went and desired the records from Laban, and Laban was angry and thrust him out. And he said, "You're a robber, and I'm going to slay you," and so on and so forth. Now, this theme of Laban being crafty, he's obviously short-tempered. He's a mighty man. He has power in Jerusalem. There's no question about that. This has been described by Nibley in a remarkable manner, and Brant is right to bring this out, because as he brings some of this stuff out, I have also found yet more information that I'm going to share with you. For ages, the cities of Palestine and Syria had been more or less under the rule of military governors, and that's what Laban was. But this is who was ruling the cities realistically. Not just the king, but the military governors. And they were of native blood also. In theory, at least, they were answerable to Egypt. That's the idea. They were by and large a sordid lot of careerists. All they wanted was a career, whose authority depended on constant deception and intrigue. And Laban fits this perfectly, doesn't he? That's interesting. Though they regarded their offices as hereditary, and they sometimes styled themselves kings. Now, the Lachish letters show us how such men were still the lords of creation in Lehi's day, 600 B.C. in Jerusalem. Lachish is about 25 to 30 miles southwest of Jerusalem. It's in that area of cities with Lachish and Akkadah and Jerusalem and some of the other cities. So the commanders of the towns around Jerusalem, as well as in Jerusalem, were still acting in close cooperation with Egypt in military matters, depending on the prestige of Egypt to bolster their own corrupt power, and still behaving as groveling and unscrupulous time servers. A few deft and telling touches resurrect the pompous Laban with photographic perfection. We learn in passing, as we read in the Book of Mormon, that he commanded a garrison of 50, that he met in full ceremonial armor with the elders of the Jews for secret consultations by night, and that he had control of a treasury, that he was part of the old aristocracy, being a distant relative of Lehi himself, and he probably held his job because of his ancestors, since he hardly received it by merit, that his house was the storing place of very old records, and he was a large man also. He was short-tempered, he was crafty, he was dangerous, and in the bargain he was cruel, greedy, unscrupulous, weak, and given to drink. All of which makes him a Rabu, that is, an Egyptian governor, to the life the very model of an Oriental Pasha, an honorific title for a governor. So, by understanding the external cultural implications of who military governors were, how they acted, what they were like, Laban fits that bill beautifully. Very remarkable. Well, Laban, of course, threatened to kill Laman, so Laman split. He took off. He said, "I have nothing doing, man. I'm leaving. I'm out of here." And then we began, Nephi says at 1 Nephi 3:14, he says, "We began to be exceedingly sorrowful, and my brethren were about to return unto my father in the wilderness." Now, here is a major turning point in the narrative. I like how Brant brings this out also. It's easy to understand Laman and Lemuel's discouragement. It truly is, especially given their probable initial lack of enthusiasm for the task in the first place. This isn't exactly fun and games or a Friday night dance they're going on, you know. Well, Nephi, in his story, he's communicating this tension between him and his brothers, their chore, the task they have, and the problems that Laban is giving them. But while he does explain that he was part of the being exceedingly sorrowful, he separates him from his brothers. He didn't agree about going back to his father.